Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have wonderful Chris on the podcast with us, and we are super excited to talk to her. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Oh, very good. How are you? Don't mind the mess in the background. I got back from traveling and I've been trying to clean out all sorts of stuff out of my house.
Not at all. Not at all. Um, we are always inspired by you. The things that you've done and that you are doing, it's amazing. So it's all good. Yeah, so it's been long that we wanted to talk to you and connect with you, and finally next month I'll be meeting you in person.
I
I'm
know.
excited.
Awesome. Yes.
I'm super excited for it. So we will start with your introduction, so if you can introduce yourself to the audience. Yes.
Sure. My name is Chris Kubecka. I go by Sec Evangelism on both Instagram and Twitter. And I do a lot of things in cyber warfare when it comes to nation state incident management, a few things with, not with, but against terrorist groups. I have handled firsthand a few cyber warfare incidents, whether it be with Space Command or the July 2009 second wave attacks against South Korea, or restoring international business operations and establishing security for the Saudi Aramco family after the 2012 first series of Shamoon attacks. And now, after I left the Aramco family, I founded my own company, which deals a lot with advising at a government level and still incident management when it comes to nation-state attacks.
Wow, that's really, really wonderful. So, we also wanted to know that you've been doing so much for the nation states, and there are people who want to contribute. How can they get started with that?
Well, one of the things that they can do is try to help, firstly, at more of their local level to establish their reputation. For example, I live in the Netherlands, and the National Dutch Police actually look for volunteers to help them with certain cases. And those cases could involve hacks against the infrastructure, against government websites, all the way up to cases of trying to find victims of human trafficking, children or adults, or to help with certain gang-related activity that deals with labor-based human trafficking and the drug business.
So, which means this requires a lot of expertise in certain areas and certain kind of a specialized knowledge in it. So, what could be that?
Well, first you can start looking at places like there's this great podcast called OSINT Curious, which details a lot of different techniques, both if you are more of a systems person like I am, or what we call human, so looking at the human intelligence gathering. Another place is there's this great organization called Bellingcat, and they actually post up their tool set that they use on a regular basis. They also are looking for volunteers to work with various cases. And through them, they can also, if you are not, say, working for a government intelligence agency or something like that, they actually offer, if you can get to them, free training on how to use their toolkit and some of the things that can be done. And another thing is, if, for example, you can work on the more local or national level, for example, with the Dutch police, they also try to help you along to teach certain techniques that can then free up some of their immediate high-tech crime unit law enforcement and set you going on, they start you off with, say, sanitized cases to start assisting with.
So, these people are going to go ahead and get these trainings done, and what one unique quality that person should possess when they are trying to serve the nation state, because nation state actors or the threat vectors, they actually pose altogether a different risk.
Well, some of the attributes that are very, very helpful are good at research skills, good at documentation, and good at communication. And these things, I think, are something that a lot of women are actually very well known for having these different types of attributes.
And now you've done a lot of things to promote women in cybersecurity, and even there will be a panel which we all will be part of. So, what's your point of view in that?
Well, my point of view is I kind of look at the U.S. Perspective where we had Rosie the Riveter. During World War II, there were not enough men to work the factory jobs and many other jobs, from sports even. And we're in this situation where, firstly, there's not enough people, much less enough men to be defenders and to help our countries when it comes to these major threats. And so now is really our Rosie the Riveter moment, because we've got digital bombs flying at us at the speed of light. And we all need to participate in helping to defend against them.
Now, we are all trying to talk about that. We have women in cyber, and there are certain things that women should possess, right? So, how we can enable all those trainings, all those knowledge sharing sessions, especially, let's say, if I want to serve the country, how can I go ahead and get started with that?
Well, there are a decent amount of free or low-cost training options. For example, I've been working with Cybrary with a lot of their free training
Mhm.
to get people started at the basic to then medium level. And that way you don't have to spend basically the amount it would cost to buy a car for 1 week's worth of training with some other organizations.
Mhm.
Because I think that the price factor of getting proper training is one thing that actually leads to part of our gap in not enough people in cybersecurity in general.
Right. And what are the major challenges that you faced um, during your tenure in cybersecurity? Because you must have seen a lot of threats, and there are a lot of hacks which are happening in the industry. So, what are the major challenges and the threats you've seen?
Well, I think not enough information in an expedient manner, because it can take a little time to get enough information to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. So the quicker you can get that information, the better. Another thing is trying to stay grounded and keep as calm as possible, because these types of situations can be quite chaotic. And one or more people need to just take very deep breaths
Mm-hmm.
and talk as calmly as possible to then quell a very chaotic situation when it comes to being in the middle of an incident.
Right. And now there is an incident going on, and there are so many other vectors involved, so many people involved, and you have to keep calm. But there is some situation wherein you need to dig deeper, and you might want to do social engineering attack. You might want to gather some more information. How do you gather information from the people whom you don't want to tell that there is something going on right now, but I want this kind of an information?
Well, you have to be very careful. So if you think that an incident is occurring or is occurring, one thing you want to be aware of is the attackers could be in your network or could be surveilling your regular communication. So you have to use alternative communications to be able to do that. Another thing is, if you are looking externally at a particular target, be very certain that you are not using the same IP address or network that could be associated with your business to give them a heads up that somebody's watching them. You have to be very, very careful and use a lot of what I call, well, what many in the industry call passive reconnaissance, so as not to allow the target or targets to know that they're actively being surveilled. So you have to have a very light touch sometimes. to also be able to, for example, keep observing what's going on in the attack to then gather additional evidence.
Mhm. On the same lines, we've seen people have started talking about threat intelligence. Like we've worked in security operations center, SOC, wherein we've monitored incidents, we have seen the events coming on. But now it's a new term wherein people talk about threat intelligence. Uh, we want to hear your views on the gathering the threat intelligence. How can we handle all those data that's before the incident that comes in, or that's their part of other breaches?
Well, one of the things to be aware of is whenever this type of information comes to you or to your shop, there's going to be some sort of inherent bias that occurs with that information. So you have to be very careful to look at additional sources to make sure what you are receiving is actually both usable and actionable and relevant. And getting additional sources about the initial piece of information that you get will also show you what type of bias it might have. For example, the BBC is going to have a different perspective and bias versus CNN versus Fox News versus a local Dutch paper. And that's just the way that it's written and it occurs, and there's a different perspective whenever a journalist or anybody writes about something. So you then have to dig a little bit deeper, sometimes the true meaning or the true story, and then use that information to try to find something, again, actionable and relevant.
Right. So if I have to ask you that in your whole journey you've summarized that there are few threat actors that you've seen, and if you have to now when we talk about future state, because people are talking about future state, that yes, these are the things that we should be doing. So we would want to hear your views that what people should be doing, or what organizations should be doing so that they are safe and sound.
Well, one of the top things you can do is make it a lot more difficult for them to get information about your organization and to be able to get in. Basically, a lot of attackers, whether they are lower level criminal hackers to nation state, they're going to look for the easiest way possible in. And if there's a lot of what we would call low hanging fruit or easy ways that they can get into your systems or find information about key individuals within your organizations, and they're going to go for that because easy, lower effort, etc. So try to make it more difficult.
Right. On this, I also remember that you've been working on a training to train people on all these things. So if you can give us a little bit information about your training, that what it is all about, and um, what's inside the training.
Well, some of the things that the training will give is an overview of IT, IoT, and ICS SCADA systems with an explanation of the IoT and ICS SCADA protocols. Because these particular protocols aren't directly, say, regular TCP/IP protocols, so they take a little bit more finesse and understanding of what they actually are. I'm also going to be teaching with an assistant, Kadeem, things about actual nation states and using real-life case studies of what I've handled in the past. And also, I'll be teaching some of the techniques that the more sophisticated attackers to the nation-state intelligence agency attackers actually use.
Okay, and if you have to summarize that, these are the things that you've been doing, and these are the things that you're looking forward to, or that you have plans to do, because you've covered IoT, OT, because this is a
Yeah.
buzzword right now. So uh, we want to know that what your research is going to be in that area, because IoT, OT is like a huge or vast area. So
Yeah.
there are challenges that people are facing, and I'm sure there are few things that you have also experienced in your journey. So what's your future state in that, like what you are looking forward to?
Well, currently I'm doing a good deal of research in the UK. Back in June, we hosted, funded by the University of Oxford, the UK's first space hackathon to discuss new space IoT. And I recently, funny enough, just after my keynote at OWASP AppSec Europe, did a remote lecture for Cambridge's research and development section involving space new IoT.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also looking at the maritime industry because there's a lot of industrial IoT in that particular space, especially when you're trying to improve safety. For example, we're looking at different types of IoT sensors on the hulls of ships to see the fatigue so that the captain and the company that owns that ship don't go straight into a storm trying to save fuel when that storm could then break apart the hull of the ship. And another thing that I'm working on is within the aviation industry, looking at industrial IoT sensors that are attached to the aircraft wing to show, again, if there's any stress fractures and if that aircraft has a normal lifespan or should be taken out of service. So these are some of the things that we're doing in those particular industries.
Great. That's really amazing because these are the some things that, or few things that people actually are looking for. So, what do you want to share with the audience that this is one thing that you should be doing in the IoT OT space, which can help the research at large?
Well, one of the things I discussed the week before last at a United Nations event is the fact that we need to look at IoT and industrial IoT not just from the price point, but for the entire lifespan. Now, many of these devices, they're cheap and quick, but they're shipped with known vulnerable libraries. There's no secure software development lifecycle. Many of these things cannot be patched. And many of the vendors that are selling them have never even heard of the OWASP Top 10 for IoT. And these are things that we now have to familiarize ourselves with, because you don't want to allow a device that can then allow for a breach in your organization or your aircraft or your satellite or inside our homes.
All right. Also, there's one thing I really wanted to ask that I really love the topic of your keynote, wherein you mentioned the woman who squashed a terrorist when an embassy gets hacked. So we want to know more about that. What was it all about?
Well, so back in 2014, when I was heading the information protection group for the Saudi Aramco family, I was called up during lunch very unexpectedly by a large man in a very nice suit who summoned me at a lunchtime and said, you need to come with me, there's been a problem. And when I found out what the problem was, I was taken directly to the Saudi Arabian embassy in The Hague. And what we initially thought was just some low-hanging fruit breach of somebody breaking into the embassy's business email because they had used a password of 123456. Unfortunately, turned into a much more serious matter. The incident lasted almost 3 months. And initially, there was an email asking a Saudi Arabian citizen to send $200 to a MoneyGram account under the name of His Royal Highness the Prince, who at the time was the ambassador to the United Kingdom for Saudi Arabia. This all looked very suspicious because it came from the ambassador's secretary's email account. So the Saudi in question contacted the ambassador to report that this was just not correct. Later we found out, because at the time I did not have full access to everything, I'm not a Saudi Arabian citizen, so that's rather expected, that the threats grew. There was then an email sent from the same account for $25,000 US to save many lives, signed ISIS, and that was sent to all of the GCC nations' embassy email accounts and the country of Turkey. Now, Oman and Qatar allowed us to collect evidence, which was very nice of them. But then it started growing even further, where unfortunately the diplomatic corps, who are kind of like the diplomatic police to a certain extent, they were trying to be proactive and sent a warning email to all of the embassies in The Hague saying, if you happen to get this demand for 25,000 from ISIS, please tell us. Unbeknownst to them or us, the perpetrator was still on the email system and replied to all back to the diplomatic corps and said, it's so great that we now have your attention. We're going to start raising up the price. And then started taunting the diplomatic corps with all of the embassies in The Hague on copy because they had used CC, not BCC. An unfortunate thing that all of us have done. But unfortunately, in this particular case, we were dealing with a terrorist organization. And the threats grew to the point where the perpetrator demanded then $35 million and then $50 million, or they said that ISIS would blow up a national landmark called the Kerr House in The Hague, and there was a function called National Saudi Day that was going to be held, where we had ambassadors from Japan, India, UK. We also had members of the Royal Dutch family that were to be in attendance. And over 400 very, very, very important people and dignitaries, ISIS then said that they would blow up the Kerr House and kill everybody involved if we did not pay $50 million. But after leading the incident for so long, also dealing with very strange Turkish intelligence agents who were also surveilling me, it was a very odd time. I was able to collect enough evidence and kick the perpetrator out that we were able to zero in on where the perpetrator actually lived, the internet traffic coming from his neighborhood. And shortly after, because the ambassador also suspected this particular person who had diplomatic immunity, was an embassy insider and a Saudi citizen, that person was shortly thereafter reassigned to a rather dangerous location in the world. And unfortunately for that individual, last I heard, he was the only one killed in a car bomb in that particular country. So it was a very, very unusual case. Lasted way longer than a typical incident normally lasts, and gave me an extreme exposure firsthand to some of the geopolitics and what happens when an embassy is hacked by a terrorist group.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much. That was really wonderful and amazing insight, because these incidents can take this long as well, and there are so many factors involved in it. So,
Yeah.
so in the end, we wanted to take some parting words from you. That what do you want to share with the audience?
Don't believe anyone who tells you you can't do anything because of your race, your gender, or anything like that. All of us can do whatever we think that we can do. If you have a will, be very, very persistent and determined. And everything that happened to you before today, good or bad, makes you the strong person that you are today and the stronger person you are tomorrow.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today. It was really, really wonderful chatting with you, and absolutely looking forward to meeting you next month. Yay.